Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Cosmic Bedtime. Tonight, we ask a small, strange question and let it dissolve rather than sharpen. What is really hiding under the ice of Europa? And the paradox is this: the answer is both nothing at all, in the sense of nothing that can reach you, and something vast, in the sense of an entire ocean, older than any sea on Earth, sealed in the dark and waiting without waiting, because ice has no hurry, and neither do we tonight. A moon smaller than our own, wrapped in a shell of frozen water, carrying inside it more liquid than every ocean on this planet combined, and none of it asking anything of you, none of it reaching this far, none of it needing to be understood before you can rest. We have 4 slow regions to drift through tonight, and you can let all 4 go, because I will carry them for you. First, the glass. We arrive high above Europa's bright, cracked ice shell, watching from a safe and painless distance, the way you might watch frost bloom on a window from the warmth of a bed. Then, the held breath, we sink in feeling only, toward the hidden ocean underneath, and toward the low, patient warmth that keeps all that water liquid in a place the sun forgets. After that, what may be waiting? A tender wandering through seafloor chemistry and gentle possibility, where even not knowing becomes a kind of comfort, and our own smallness turns out to be something soft to rest inside, rather than something to fear. And last, how we came to know, the unhurried story of plumes and probes and 4 centuries of watching, told slowly enough that it eases you rather than wakes you, right up until sleep takes over the telling. If this kind of long, slow drifting is helpful to you, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who are also lying awake, staring at a ceiling, wanting somewhere unhurried to put their mind. But that is only if you feel like it. Nothing here requires anything from you, tonight or ever. There is nothing here to hold on to, and nothing you need to remember by morning. Let your eyes rest, half closed or fully closed, whichever your body prefers right now. Let your jaw loosen, let your shoulders ease down and away from your ears, down into the mattress, down into whatever is holding you. Let your hands open, one faint finger at a time, and feel the weight of your own arms sinking, unhurried, into the bed beneath you. Your breath can slow on its own. You don't have to help it. There is an ocean far away that has been patient for 4 billion years, and it can be patient a little longer while you rest. Settle in. Let's begin. Let your breath find its own unhurried rhythm now, in through the nose, out through parted lips, and let the weight of the mattress take every part of you it is offered. Because tonight, we are not staying here at all. We are leaving the room the way smoke leaves a window left open a finger's width, without hurry. Without a plan, simply drifting up past the ceiling, past the roof, past the last thin scarf of atmosphere, until the earth itself becomes only one more light behind us, small and blue and forgiving. There is nowhere you need to arrive. There is only the leaving, and the leaving is enough. We travel a long way, though it costs you nothing, not one muscle, not one held thought. Months of ordinary time fold down into a single easy breath, the way distances do in dreams, and somewhere in that folding, Jupiter opens in front of you like a slow amber eye, banded in cream and rust, so vast that the mind gives up trying to hold its edges and simply lets it fill the window instead. You are not going to Jupiter tonight, though. You are going to something much smaller that circles it, something that has been circling it, faithfully, tirelessly, for longer than any name has existed to call it by. Her name is Europa. Say it to yourself, low, like the first word of a lullaby, and picture a moon just slightly smaller than our own, a little under 1,000 miles across, close enough in size to Earth's moon that if the two were set side by side, you might mistake one for the other at a glance. But look closer, because that is what we are here to do tonight. Not to solve anything, only to look. The way you might look at a closed door in a house you love, wondering, without any urgency at all, what quiet room lies just beyond it. Europa does not wander. She keeps to a tight, devoted orbit, circling giant Jupiter once every 3.5 days, a rhythm so steady it could be the pulse of something sleeping, in, out, over and over, unbroken since before there were eyes anywhere to count it. Let that rhythm become yours for a moment. 3.5 days to circle a world 400 times the mass of our own, and she has done it so many millions of times that the number stops meaning anything useful and becomes instead a kind of reassurance. This is a place where things keep happening the same patient way, again and again, whether or not anyone is watching. Out here, so far from the sun that its light arrives thin and pale, more like the last hour of dusk than the full gold of noon, you might expect everything to feel cold and forgotten, a place left behind at the far edge of the porch light. And yet Europa does not feel forgotten at all. She feels tended. She feels somehow looked after, the way a small lamp left burning in a distant window tells you someone is still awake inside, still moving quietly from room to room, long after the rest of the street has gone dark. There is a warmth to this moon that has nothing to do with sunlight, and we will come to understand where that warmth is kept a little later. For now, it is enough simply to notice it, the way you notice the faint heat still rising from a stove long after the flame beneath it has been turned down low. And here is the first thing the eye finds, drifting closer now. Close enough that Europa fills the whole of the view. She is bright. Almost startlingly bright. The palest, most polished surface of any large body in the entire solar system. A soft ivory white with faint threads of amber and rust crossing it here and there, like veins beneath skin. Where other worlds wear the gray dust of eons, scarred and pitted and tired-looking, Europa wears something closer to glass. It catches what little sunlight reaches this far out, a fraction of what warms your own window at home, and gives almost all of it back, so that from a distance she seems to glow with a light that is not quite her own and not quite borrowed either. Something in between. Something patient. This is the moment to let the thread settle into you, because it will stay with us the whole night, returning quietly, again and again, the way a tide returns to the same stretch of sand. Beneath that pale shining glass, something enormous is holding its breath. An entire ocean, vast and dark and undisturbed, lying sealed beneath the ice, the way a held breath lies sealed behind closed lips. Not desperate, not straining, simply waiting, the way water waits in a covered well, the way a secret waits in someone who has decided, gently, to keep it a little longer. It is not going anywhere. It is not asking anything of you. Whatever moves in that dark tonight has moved there for longer than your great-great-grandparents had names, and it will go on moving there long after tonight is folded away into the soft pile of nights you no longer remember individually, only as warmth, only as safety, only as sleep. So here is the question this whole night is built around, and I want you to notice how little it asks of you. What is really hiding under the ice of Europa? Not a puzzle to be cracked before you're allowed to rest, not a locked door you have to force. Just a soft wondering, the kind that drifts up unbidden right at the edge of sleep, when the mind has stopped working and started simply drifting, the kind of question a small child might ask, looking up at a frozen pond in winter, not with fear of what's beneath, but with a kind of open, trusting curiosity. Is there something down there? Is it warm? Is it awake? We are going to let that question stay open all night. We are not here to pry the glass off and shine a light into everything at once. We are here to circle and settle and look, the way you might sit at the edge of a covered pool at dusk, content simply to watch the moonlight move across its lid. Come closer now, lower, the way you might lean nearer to a window on a winter night without opening it, breath fogging faintly on the cold pane. Europa is close enough now to fill everything, and what strikes you first, more than anything you were told to expect, is the smoothness. This is, by a wide margin, the smoothest large surface anywhere among the worlds that turn around our sun. Smoother than any moon, any planet, any wandering rock you could name. So smooth that from this near height, it could almost be mistaken for a vast frozen sea back on Earth. The kind that forms overnight on a windless lake and holds a mirror to the sky until the first skater dares to test it. There are no towering mountains here, no jagged spires, nothing to catch the eye and startle it. Only that pale, faintly veined shell, curving away in every direction, catching the thin far light of the sun and holding it, unhurried, the way a becalmed sea holds a reflection long after the wind that made ripples has died down. Let yourself simply float above it for a while. No destination, no task, just this low, easy pass over a moon-sized pane of glass. The kind of glass a house might have where someone lives quietly behind frosted windows, present but unseen. Notice how the mind, freed from any need to understand the whole of it tonight, starts to relax into the looking itself, into the pale color, into the faint threads of rust drawn across the white like old ink bled slowly through paper, into the sheer strange calm of a world that seems, from up here, to be holding itself so very motionless. There is no wind here to stir a single grain of frost, no weather at all in the way you know it, no clouds gathering or breaking apart overhead. Only this long, patient hush, broken by nothing but the far, silent wheel of Jupiter filling half the sky behind you, its bands of amber and cream turning so slowly they seem almost fixed in place, a painted backdrop rather than a living world. Against that enormous, silent canvas, Europa looks smaller than ever, and somehow more precious for it, a single pale coin held up to a distant lamp, catching what light there is and returning it, faithfully, the way a kept promise returns exactly what was given. That stillness is not emptiness, though. It never has been. It is closer to the hush of someone sleeping beside you, chest rising so slowly you almost hold your own breath to watch for it. And then there it is, the smallest movement, proof of life, continuing quietly beneath a surface that gives almost nothing away. We are going to lower ourselves nearer still in a moment, close enough to touch that glass without breaking it, close enough to trace the fine lines that cross it and start to wonder, the way you wonder about the pale scars on your own skin, what old story each one is quietly telling. For now, only float here, above the brightest ice in all the dark reaches around the sun, and let your own breathing slow to match the vast, unhurried patience of the moon turning gently beneath you, keeping its 3.5-day rhythm, keeping its secret, in no rush at all to be understood before morning. Let the orbit carry you nearer now, closer than before, until the white glass fills the whole of your view and there is nothing else to look at but the surface itself. This is what holds the breath in. This is the lid on the held ocean. And up close it is not a blank thing at all. It is a face, patient and pale, marked by a long lifetime of very small, very unhurried movements. Somewhere between 15 and 25 kilometers of ice lie between you and the water beneath, a shell thick enough to swallow the tallest mountains of your own world and still leave room above them. And yet it is not the solid, final thing it seems from a distance. It creeps, it shifts. Across years, across centuries, it moves the way a glacier moves, so slowly that no single moment could ever show it happening, and only the long patient record of light on its face tells the truth. That this ice is alive with motion too small for any one glance to catch. Notice, too, how the light behaves on it. This is, by most measures anyone has taken, the brightest and smoothest ice surface anywhere in the whole solar system, reflecting back so much sunlight that from a distance it can outshine moons many times its size. Up close, though, brightness is not the same as blankness. The white has grain to it. The way fresh snow has grain when you kneel close enough to see each crystal catch the light differently from its neighbor. There are feathered patches where frost has settled fine as breath on a cold window, and there are older, duller stretches where the ice has sat a little longer, weathered by the endless faint rain of radiation from the giant world nearby, dulling what was once fresher and brighter into something more the color of old linen. None of it is warm by any measure you would recognize. This is a place colder than any winter your body has ever known. And yet, none of it feels lifeless either. Because everything about its texture tells you it is still being made, still being touched, still arriving. Let your eyes rest on the lines that run across it. They are called lineae, and from here they look like something between a river seen from far above and a hairline crack in old porcelain, threading for hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers, tinted a faint rust and rose against all that white. They are not wounds. Think of them instead as the places where the ice, flexing under some deep and steady pressure, has opened just enough to let a little of what lies beneath rise up and stain the surface with color, the way a vein shows faintly through skin, the way a blush rises and settles. Some of the lineae run in long, gentle double lines, almost parallel, as if drawn with two fingers dragged side by side across frost. Others tangle and cross, layer over older lines, erase and redraw themselves, a script being rewritten again and again by the same slow hand, never quite finished. Never needing to be. Many of the widest lineae carry a raised ridge down each side, a low double seam like the two edges of a wound that has closed and left a faint stitch behind, and if you could lower yourself down onto one, you would find it standing only 100 meters or so above the plain around it. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, only a long, low, patient ridge, built the way a single ridge might be built if the same seam opened and closed, thousands upon thousands of times across thousands upon thousands of years, each small opening leaving one more thin layer behind before sealing itself again. And scattered among the lineae, in patches here and there across the hemisphere, are places where the ice has broken into something stranger. Chaos terrain, it is called, though nothing about drifting past it feels chaotic at all. Picture great rafts of ice, each one whole and solid in itself, tilted, rotated, rafted apart from their neighbors, and then refrozen in new positions, like sheets of pack ice on a quiet sea that were nudged loose and left to settle wherever they came to rest. Some rafts have drifted only a little from where they began, keeping the ghost of the pattern they once belonged to, so that if you trace their edges, you can almost fit them back together. The way you might piece together a plate that fell and cracked, but never truly shattered. Beneath these places, many who study this moon believe warmth once rose closer to the surface than usual, softening the ice from below until it could not help but rearrange itself, slowly, into this new and jumbled calm. What is strangest of all, if you let yourself notice it, is what is missing. Look for craters, the small round scars that mark almost every other icy or rocky surface drifting through this system, each one a record of some ancient collision, and here you will find astonishingly few. A handful, scattered thin across the whole visible face, where other moons wear thousands. This absence is itself a kind of evidence, a negative space that speaks as clearly as any mark would. Surfaces that no longer change keep every scar they are ever given, the way a stone remembers every strike. A surface with so few scars is a surface that has been quietly erasing its own history, smoothing over what falls on it, healing across whatever mars it, again and again, until only the newest impacts remain legible at all. From counting what little cratering is there, and how such surfaces are aged elsewhere, this ice is thought to be perhaps only 40 to 90 million years old. Young, almost startlingly young, when set beside a solar system that has been circling its star for 4.5 billion years. The shell you are looking down on now is not the same shell that existed when the first flowering plants were only beginning to open on a much younger Earth. It has been rewritten since. Set it beside your own life, if it helps to make the scale feel real. A surface only tens of millions of years old is still, by the patient standards of moons and planets, something closer to a newborn than an elder, younger by far than the mountains that shape the horizons of your own world, younger than the deep ocean basins beneath your own seas, and yet old enough to have watched entire families of creatures rise and vanish on the world you call home. Time here is not measured in anything you would recognize as a single lifetime. It is measured the way the slow turning of a season is measured, except that each season lasts longer than your whole species has existed, and the ice keeps turning through them anyway, unbothered, unhurried, certain it has all the centuries it could ever need. There is something worth resting on in that thought. A crust so ancient in its origin, and yet so young on its face, is not a dead thing wearing an old scar. It is closer to skin, forever shedding what is old and drawing something newer up to replace it, forever closing over its own small hurts before they can become permanent. Nothing about this ice is frozen in the way stillness is sometimes imagined, as an ending, as a stopping. It is frozen the way a held breath is held, full, waiting, alive with pressure, rather than the way a thing left out in true cold and true silence simply stops. Whatever moves beneath this shell moves it from underneath, presses on it, warms it in places, nudges its rafts loose and lets them settle again, keeps its long red lines opening and closing like something breathing at a pace far too slow for any watching eye to catch in a single lifetime. You are floating above a face that keeps healing itself, and a face that heals is a face attached, however distantly, to something that is still doing the work of living. So let the question settle now, unhurried, the way every good question is allowed to settle before it is answered. Why would ice bother to move like this at all? Why would a crust behave less like armor and more like skin, flexing, cracking, staining faintly red along its seams, closing back over itself before too much time has passed? What could be underneath a shell that acts as though something underneath it needs tending? The cracks are not silent. They are the palest kind of hint, traced across tens of thousands of kilometers, and for a long while, those hints were all that anyone watching from afar had to go on. A pattern on white glass and a guess forming quietly behind it. But a guess is not proof, and what waited under the ice would not stay only a guess for very long. Something else was about to be felt, not seen, an unmistakable trace, caught by an instrument built only to sense the invisible pull and hum of things too deep to ever be photographed. A trace that could belong to nothing except a vast body of water, moving, salted, and very much alive with its own quiet electricity. Somewhere beneath everything you have just been looking at. And those cracks, threading the ice like veins beneath pale skin, are hinting at something the eye alone could never confirm. A hint is only ever an invitation, and so we let ourselves be invited further, down past the glass, down toward the question that has waited under every fracture and every raft of chaos terrain. Is there truly a sea down there, or only the memory of one frozen solid long ago? It is a question that does not need to be solved tonight so much as followed, the way you might follow a low hum through a house at night, unhurried, curious, unafraid of what you'll find. Because whatever it is, it has been there the whole time. And it was never a threat. The answer came from a spacecraft that never touched the ice at all. In the closing years of the last century, an orbiter named Galileo circled Jupiter again and again, tracing wide patient loops through that giant planet's own vast magnetic field. And each time it passed near Europa, something curious happened to its instruments. Jupiter's magnetic field is enormous, reaching far out past its moons, sweeping through them as the planet turns beneath it. And where an ordinary frozen world would simply let that field pass through unchanged, Europa did something else. It answered. Its own faint magnetic signature rose and fell in time with Jupiter's, shifting direction as the larger planet's field shifted, as though Europa were an instrument being played, resonating back exactly the note it had been given. That kind of answer, in the quiet language of physics, has only one honest translation. A field that induces its own echo in a nearby body means that somewhere inside that body there is a layer able to carry electric current, and the only thing that carries current so readily, so completely, at that scale, is a wide shell of liquid saturated with salt. Not a trickle. Not a damp pocket, a continuous, global, electrically conductive layer, wrapping the entire moon like a second skin worn just beneath the first. Ice alone could never have answered Jupiter's call. Rock alone could never have answered so faithfully. Only water, salted, connected, unbroken, could hum back in perfect time with a planet 1,000 times its own size. Let that settle for a moment. The way a held note settles into silence after the string stops moving. The cracks on the surface were never just decoration on a dead white shell. They were the visible edge of a signal that reached all the way to a spacecraft in orbit, saying, in the only voice available to something with no mouth and no light, there is a sea in here. And it has been listening to you the whole time you thought you were only listening to it. And once the presence of the water was confirmed, the next question, the natural one, the one that follows any discovery of depth, was simply, how deep? How much sea is actually being kept, hidden this whole time beneath 20 kilometers of overlying ice? The instruments could not offer an exact figure. The way a hand pressed flat against a closed door cannot count the rooms beyond it, but they could offer a range, and the range itself is enough to still the breath in your own chest for a moment. Somewhere between 60 and 150 kilometers of liquid water, layered beneath the ice, reaching down toward a rocky floor far below. Not a lake, not a sea in the modest, coastal sense the word usually carries for us. An ocean, global, continuous, wrapping the entire moon the way our own oceans wrap our own world, except deeper and darker and older than any wave that has ever reached a shore we know. To hold that number honestly, it helps to set it beside something familiar, the way you might set a small stone beside a mountain just to understand the mountain's true size. All of Earth's oceans together, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, every gulf and strait and trench folded into all of them, hold a certain volume of water, a number so large it stops feeling like a number and starts feeling like an idea. And Europa, a moon barely smaller than our own, tucked in the shadow of a much larger planet, appears to be holding something like twice that amount, in a single unbroken layer beneath its ice. Twice every ocean we have ever sailed, swum in, mapped, feared, loved, crossed in ships, mourned people into. Twice all of that, resting quietly in the dark of a small world we usually think of as being made of nothing but rock and cold light. It is worth simply staying with that thought a while, letting it widen rather than rushing past it toward the next fact. Because it changes the shape of what the phrase holding its breath was actually describing. It is not a small breath. It is not a modest private pocket of stillness tucked somewhere out of the way. It is an entire hidden sea, vast beyond the reach of ordinary comparison, that has been keeping itself whole and liquid and unbroken for longer than most of what we count as history, sealed beneath a lid of ice that reflects sunlight so brightly it can be picked out from Earth with a telescope, while the true size of what it is hiding stays completely invisible from above. The glass shows only its own bright, smooth, uncracked face. It gives no indication whatsoever of the scale of the sea it is covering. And yet, even as that number settles, a smaller, quieter question rises up alongside it, the kind of question a sleepy mind reaches for, almost on its own. Out here, so distant from the sun, that daylight on Europa is only about 1/25th as strong as daylight on Earth. So far that the star which warms us into something barely brighter than a very determined evening light, how does an ocean like this one manage to stay liquid at all? Water freezes. That is what water does, given cold enough surroundings and enough time, and the surroundings here are cold in a way that is difficult to picture from beneath a blanket on a mild night. Hundreds of degrees below anything we would call comfortable, hundreds of degrees below anything we would call survivable. By every simple expectation, a moon this far from its sun should be solid through and through. Ice all the way down to its rocky core, frozen still and silent and finished. The way a pond freezes overnight in deep winter and stays that way until spring finally reaches it. But Europa is not finished. Whatever is keeping that ocean from freezing solid is not coming from the sun at all, because the sun, at this distance, simply isn't strong enough to be the answer. The warmth has to be coming from somewhere else, somewhere closer, somewhere built directly into Europa's own ongoing relationship with the giant world it orbits. Think for a moment of what sunlight actually is. Out this far, a low, faint wash of light arriving after traveling for the better part of an hour across empty space, thin enough that even at local noon on Europa's ice, the sky would seem closer to a deep, bright twilight than to any daytime we would recognize. That kind of light can illuminate a surface without ever warming what lies beneath it. It can make the ice glow, brilliant and white against the black, and still leave everything underneath as cold as the space around it, because light this diluted has almost nothing left to give by the time it arrives. If Europa depended on the sun the way a pond in a garden depends on it, there would be no ocean to speak of at all. Only a ball of ice, silent and finished, all the way down to a hard frozen core, no different in spirit from any of the countless still, unremarkable little worlds scattered through this part of the dark. And yet the induced field found something else entirely. Something is working on this moon from the inside, continuously, unseen. The way a low fire kept in a hearth all through a long winter night needs no daylight at all to keep a room from turning cold. Whatever it is has apparently been at this task for a very long while, long enough for an entire ocean, twice the size of every sea on Earth combined, to have never once frozen through in 4.5 billion years of turning through this cold, dim outer neighborhood of the solar system. That is not a small feat of warmth. That is a sustained, patient furnace tucked somewhere inside a small moon, doing its slow work in complete silence, in complete dark, with nothing on the surface to announce it except a scatter of reddish cracks, and an ocean that quietly, faithfully, refuses to stop being liquid. So, we let the question rise gently and stay there for a moment, unanswered but not unsettling. The kind of open question that a drowsy mind can simply hold rather than chase. What could possibly keep a sea warm enough to stay a sea this far from any sun for longer than almost anything else in the solar system has managed to stay the same? The answer is not hiding in the water itself, and it is not hiding in the ice above it. It is hiding in the orbit, in the long, unhurried, endlessly repeating path Europa traces around Jupiter, and in the quiet company it keeps out there with its neighboring moons, each pass tugging at it in a rhythm too slow and too vast for us to feel, but never too slow to matter. So far from the sun, water should not stay water. It should be stone hard, locked, finished. And yet it isn't, and the answer to that riddle is not hiding in the light at all, because there is almost none of it out here. It is hiding in the orbit itself, in the shape of Europa's path around Jupiter, a shape that was never allowed to become a perfect circle. Picture 3 moons in a line, night after night, century after century, Io closest to Jupiter, Europa next, Ganymede beyond her. For every one time Ganymede circles the giant planet, Europa circles exactly twice. And for every one time Europa circles, Io circles exactly twice again. 4, 2, 1. A ratio so precise it sounds like something engineered, though nothing built it. It simply settled into place, billions of years ago, the way a hanging chime settles into its truest note and then keeps ringing it, or the way 3 dancers, given enough centuries, find a shared count and never lose it again. Astronomers call it a resonance, and what it means, in practice, is that these 3 moons are forever tugging at one another in the same recurring pattern, forever meeting at the same points in their orbits, forever reinforcing the same small deviation from a circle. Every time Europa passes closest to Io's gravity and closest to Ganymede's gravity, she is nudged, ever so slightly, away from roundness. Left alone, her path would relax back toward a circle within a few million years. Friction and gravity always want to smooth things out. Given enough time, the way a struck bell eventually falls silent. But she is never left alone. Io and Ganymede keep pulling her back into that stretched, elongated shape, orbit after orbit. A correction so old it no longer feels like an event. It feels like a rule, a fact of her existence as fixed as the number of hours in her day. There is nothing chaotic in this. It is closer to a very old agreement between three bodies who cannot see one another, who never touch, who simply arrange themselves again and again into the same configuration of distances. Io racing around Jupiter in under 2 days, molten and restless with its own share of this same tugging, its surface torn by volcanoes, Ganymede, largest of them, circling wide and steady on the outside, lending its own faint pull to the arrangement without needing to change very much itself. And Europa between them, neither the most disturbed nor the calmest, receiving just enough of a nudge at just the right rhythm to matter enormously over deep time, though it would look like nothing at all across a single week of watching. And an elongated orbit around a planet as massive as Jupiter is not a small detail. It is the whole engine. Because Europa's path is not a perfect circle, her distance from Jupiter changes as she travels, closer at one point, farther at another, closer, farther, closer, farther, 4 days of breathing in and breathing out. And Jupiter's gravity does not pull on a moon evenly. It pulls harder on the near side than on the far side, always, the way the moon pulls harder on the near side of Earth's oceans than the far side, which is why our own tides rise and fall. On Earth, that difference moves water. On Europa, with her elongated orbit constantly changing her distance, that difference does something larger. It moves the whole body. As Europa swings nearer to Jupiter, the giant planet's pull stretches her rock and her ice ever so slightly toward itself, drawing her into a faint egg shape. As she swings farther away, that pull relaxes, and she eases back toward round. Closer, stretch, farther, relax, closer, stretch, farther, relax. 4 days, over and over, for 4 billion years. This is tidal heating, and it is worth sitting with the word tidal for a moment, because it is not a metaphor here. It is the same force, the same physics, that pulls the sea up a beach and lets it fall again, only scaled up until it is kneading an entire moon. Imagine hands, unhurried and enormous, pressing into dough that never quite stops being worked. Not violent, not sudden, just a patient, rhythmic squeeze and release that repeats every few days without fail. Rock does not enjoy being flexed like that. Ice does not enjoy it either. Something has to absorb the effort of being reshaped over and over, and what absorbs it is friction, deep inside the moon, between grains of rock and crystals of ice rubbing against their neighbors as the whole body deforms and undeforms. And friction, wherever it happens, releases warmth, a small amount with each flex. But multiplied across an entire moon, across every single orbit, across roughly 400,000 orbits since Europa first settled into her rhythm with Io and Ganymede, that small amount becomes a hearth. Not a fire in the way we picture fire, no flame, no light, nothing that could be seen, but a low, steady, internal warmth, seeping outward from the rock at Europa's heart, radiating up through everything above it, including the ocean, including the ice, keeping the whole interior from ever settling into the deep cold that the sunlight alone would leave it in. This is the answer the previous movement was reaching for. Water this far from the sun has no business staying liquid on solar warmth. Jupiter receives only a 25th of the light that falls on Earth, faint and thin by the time it arrives, barely enough to cast a shadow you could call sharp. Left to sunlight, Europa's ocean would have frozen solid long before life on Earth had even found its footing. It is tidal heating that changes the arithmetic. a source of warmth that has nothing to do with any star, born entirely out of the geometry of 3 moons holding one another in a long, unbroken dance. And because that dance is stable, because the resonance keeps renewing the eccentricity that keeps the flexing going, the heating is not a passing event. It is not a spike that will fade. It is closer to a pulse, one that has kept the same tempo for longer than there has been complex life anywhere in this solar system, and shows no obvious sign of stopping. Think of what 4 billion years of that pulse actually means. Long before the first stone tool, long before the first breath on land, long before the first cell learned to divide, Europa's rock was already being pressed and released by this same rhythm every 3.5 days without a single missed beat. Mountains on Earth have risen and worn away to nothing in that span. Whole oceans here have opened and closed, and through all of it, in a smaller, colder world a great distance away, the same faint squeeze has kept returning, like a pulse felt at the wrist of someone sleeping soundly. So steady it becomes easy to forget it is even there, and yet everything about the body's warmth depends on it continuing. There is something worth resting on here, in the stillness of an orbit doing this much unnoticed work. Nothing about Europa's circling looks urgent from the outside. 4 moons swinging around Jupiter in their long, patient loops, night after night, indistinguishable to the eye from any other orbit anywhere. And yet inside that ordinary-looking motion is the entire reason the ocean has never frozen. The entire reason there is a breath being held under the ice at all. The patience was never a choice the ocean made. It was built into the mechanics from the very beginning, laid down in the tilt and stretch of an orbit, shaped by neighbors it will never stop dancing with. Jupiter's gravity does not let Europa rest into a perfect circle, and so Europa's own gravity, working on her own rock, does not let her ocean rest into ice. One patience feeding another, all the way down. It is a strange kind of comfort when you turn it over unhurried. Something can be held in tension, never quite settled, never fully at rest, tugged and released, 4 days at a time, and that very lack of final rest can be the thing that keeps it warm, keeps it alive, keeps it from hardening completely. The moon does not hold still. The ocean does not hold still, and that is precisely why the ocean has not frozen. The unrest, kept low and rhythmic across billions of years, has become its own form of safekeeping. So the warmth is real, and it is old, and it rises from below rather than falling from above. But warmth alone does not explain everything about that white shell floating above it. A source of heat at the core says nothing, by itself, about what happens at the border, at the place where the deep rock-warmed water finally meets the underside of all that ice. Is that boundary a wall, sealed and final, the ocean entirely cut off from the surface it never touches? Or is there some quiet trade happening there too, some way for what lies below to reach, faintly, toward what lies above, and for what lies above to reach back down? The glass looked smooth and whole from orbit. Whether it is truly sealed or only seems that way from a distance is the question worth drifting closer to answer next. And so the question lingers in the space between ice and water, right at the seam where the glass meets what it is holding. And the answer, when it comes, is almost tender in its simplicity. The seal was never total. The shell breathes. Not the way a chest rises and falls, not with any hurry, but in its own unhurried mineral way, trading small gifts across a boundary that only looks final from a distance. Up here, floating above that bright rind of ice, you can let yourself imagine the traffic that never stops. The whole patient economy moving between the world above the glass and the world beneath it. It begins, as so much on Europa begins, with Jupiter itself. The giant world does not only hold this moon in its gravity, it bathes the moon in radiation, an invisible weather of charged particles sleeting down onto that bright surface, day after day. For as long as the ice has existed, you do not need to picture violence in this. Picture instead a kind of quiet, ceaseless rain, falling on a roof that never complains, striking the topmost skin of frozen water molecule by molecule. Where it lands, it does something almost alchemical. It takes the plain, familiar water ice and splits some of it apart, freeing oxygen and other reactive little fragments, oxidants, chemical sparks that this bombardment has coaxed loose from something as ordinary as frost. It is less like an assault and more like sunlight waking something dormant in the topsoil of a garden. Except here, the light is invisible and the garden is made of glass, and it happens across a span of time too long for a single mind to hold, only to trust. Those fragments do not simply sit where they land. This is where the shell, thick as it is, proves that it is not a wall but something closer to an unhurried living skin, and it begins to fold those oxidants inward, the way skin might carry something applied to its surface a little deeper with each passing hour. Scientists speak of convection within the ice, and of something like subduction, borrowed from the language of Earth's own restless crust, where one plate can be tugged down beneath another. Here, in this colder, quieter version, warmer ice from below can rise, and older, chemically enriched ice from above can sink, trading places over the span of centuries, of millennia, in a churn so gradual that from any single vantage point, the ice appears to be doing nothing at all. And yet, it is always doing something. It is carrying those small gifts from the radiation-struck surface down through the shell's own body, folding them under, patient the way a glacier is patient, patient the way stone is patient, moving whole cathedrals of material a hand's width at a time. There is no visible seam where this happens, no line you could point to and say, here is where the young ice ends and the old ice begins. It is more like the way warmth moves through a thick blanket pulled over a sleeping body, not in a single obvious current, but in countless small drifts, rising where it is faintest and sinking where it has cooled, until the whole covering has quietly rearranged itself by morning without anyone having felt it move. 20 kilometers of ice is an almost unthinkable thickness when you try to picture it laid flat, deeper than the tallest mountains on Earth are tall, and yet within that great depth of frozen water, motion is possible. Motion is happening. Simply too gradual for any single lifetime to register it as motion at all. A pocket of ice warmed near the ocean below might take longer to rise to the surface than our entire written history has existed. Buoyed upward by fractions of a degree, arriving finally at the top, changed by everything it carried and everything it passed through along the way. And somewhere in that long, patient carrying, the traffic reverses, because the ocean is not merely receiving, it is answering. Deep in that dark water, salts drawn from the rocky floor far below dissolve and drift, most likely ordinary sodium chloride, the same simple salt that seasons a meal on Earth, together with magnesium sulfate, a compound familiar to anyone who has ever dissolved bath salts into warm water at the end of a long day. These minerals ride the currents upward, following the same cracks and fractures that let the surface breathe, rising through fissures in the ice the way sap might rise through the smallest veins of a very old, very patient tree. When they reach the places nearest the surface, where radiation and vacuum and starlight all meet the ice at once, something happens to them. The particle bombardment that split water above also works on these risen salts, altering them, giving them the reddish, rust-toned stain that colors the long cracks called lineae. That same warm color you noticed earlier tracing its way across the bright shell like the fine lines on the inside of a wrist. What looked, from orbit, like simple decoration, like the ice merely showing its age, turns out to be a kind of signature, ocean water written faintly across glass, evidence carried up from the deep and printed onto the surface for anyone patient enough to look. So the boundary is not a wall after all, not a hard stop between one world and another, but something more like a very slow, very old conversation, carried on the way an unhurried correspondence might pass between two people who have all the time there is. The surface gives radiation-borne oxidants, chemical gifts made of light and cold, and Jupiter's own restless energy, and folds them downward across generations of ice. The ocean gives salt, given upward from stone that has waited in the dark for longer than any sea on Earth has existed, and receives faintly colored proof of its own reach, painted along the cracks for the stars to see. Neither side of the exchange hurries. Neither side seems to mind how long it takes. A single grain of that reddish stain might have begun its journey as ocean water before the first cities rose on Earth, before language, before fire was tended in any hearth we would recognize, and it is only now, only after all that unhurried travel, settling faintly into the ice above your orbit tonight. Civilizations rise and rest and pass, and the shell keeps trading its small gifts anyway, on a clock that does not know what a civilization is. Think of it, if it helps, as a very long letter, sent one word at a time, each word taking 1,000 years to arrive, and yet the letter is never abandoned, never lost, never left half-finished on a desk somewhere. The ocean writes in salt. The surface writes back in oxidants and radiation-softened ice. And the lineae, those long reddish lines you noticed earlier tracing their way across the bright shell, are simply where the two letters cross, where the handwriting of one world becomes briefly visible against the paper of the other. You do not need to read every word of that correspondence to feel the peace in it. It is enough to know that it exists, that it has been going on since before there was anyone to notice, and that it will keep going on this way long after tonight, long after every worry you carried into this orbit has softened and been forgotten, the way old ink softens at the edges until only its warmth remains on the page. There is something almost comforting in that mismatch of scale, in the thought of a boundary this patient, this willing to let its business take as long as it takes. Nothing about this exchange has ever needed to be finished by a certain hour. Nothing about it has ever needed you, or anyone, to hurry it along, or even to witness it. It has been happening in darkness, unwatched, for longer than watching itself has existed among the living things of this solar system. And still it has never stopped, never rushed, never once needed to justify its own slowness. You can let that thought settle over you now, the way the reddish stain settles into a crack in old ice, without urgency, simply arriving where it was always going to arrive. And once you have imagined all of this, the radiation falling like faint rain, the ice folding it under with the patience of a very old tide, the salt rising in answer through veins of fracture and fissure, painting its rust-colored proof along the surface for you to notice from so far above, it becomes almost natural to wonder what it would feel like to follow that same path yourself, down through the very seam you have been studying from a comfortable distance. The boundary that trades so freely between above and below no longer feels like something to observe from orbit. It feels like a door left very slightly open, an invitation extended without any urgency attached to it. The kind of invitation that will still be there whenever you are ready to accept it. So let the ice fall away beneath you now, layer by layer, the bright surface giving way to blue-shadowed depths, the depths giving way to something darker still, until the last pale gleam of sunlight through glass thins to nothing above you, and you are no longer looking down at the ocean that has been holding its breath all this while. You are inside it. And since something is always passing between the ceiling and the sea, salt rising, oxidants sinking, gifts traded across the glass on timescales longer than any of your worries, you can let yourself follow that same path down now, through the last pale seam of ice and into the water itself. There is no falling here, only sinking, the way a leaf sinks once it has decided the air is done with it, unhurried, weightless, without a single hard edge to catch you. Above you, the ceiling recedes into a memory of light, a faint, bruised glow filtering down through 15 or 20 kilometers of ice, thinning with every meter, until even that memory fades and there is only the dark. And the dark is not empty, it is full, the way a held breath is full. Around you, the water holds you the way water always wanted to hold you, before there was ground to stand on or air to breathe, back when floating was the only way anything moved. Your shoulders loosen. Your arms drift out from your sides on their own, because here there is nothing to reach for and nothing to reach for you. You do not need to swim. You do not need to do anything at all. Feel how the cold of this ocean is not the cold of a night wind. It is a low, even cold, a held temperature. The kind of cold that has stopped changing its mind millions of years ago and settled into something closer to stillness than to chill. It presses on you evenly, from every direction at once, so evenly that after a while you stop feeling pressed at all and start feeling only suspended, cradled at the exact point where up and down have quietly agreed to stop mattering. Somewhere above you, a ceiling of glass, thick and patient, sealing this whole world in. Somewhere below you, impossibly far, a warm, rocky floor, the first true ground this ocean has ever touched. And you are neither closer to one than the other, you are simply between them, held in the middle distance the way a whispered word is held in the middle of a long sentence, necessary, unhurried, going nowhere, yet. Notice, too, that you have no sense of falling toward either boundary. That is the strange comfort of being held between two distances rather than pinned against one. The ceiling is real, the floor is real, and yet neither is asking anything of you right now. You are simply buoyant, the way a held breath is buoyant in a chest that has stopped trying to release it. Weight and water finding a quiet agreement between them that lets you rest exactly where you are. If you have ever floated on your back in a warm bath and felt your own body forget, for a moment, that it has edges, that is the closest this feeling comes to. Except here, the forgetting goes on and on, unmeasured. Because there is no clock-keeping time this far under the glass, only the patient turning of the current and the low, unbothered hum of a world that has never once needed to hurry through a single one of its 4 billion years. A current finds you. It is not a current in the way you might picture a current. No rush, no pull, nothing that asks anything of your body. It is closer to a hand turning a leaf over in a garden pond, slow and idle, more curiosity than force. It takes your shoulder first, and you rotate a few unhurried degrees, and then it lets you go and takes your ankle instead, and you turn the other way, drifting through a lazy arc that has no beginning and no destination. You are being carried the way something is carried when nobody is in a hurry to arrive. There is no current down here that has anywhere urgent to be. This water has had 4 billion years to move from one side of itself to the other, and it has never once rushed. Notice how dark does not feel the same down here as it might on a night when you are waiting for sleep and the dark feels like a held question. This dark is the opposite of a question. It is the answer already given, settled long before you arrived, worn smooth the way the ice above has worn itself smooth, resurfacing and resurfacing until nothing sharp is left. Nothing here needs your eyes. Nothing here is waiting to be seen. You can let your eyelids do what they want to do. Close halfway, close all the way. Because there is nothing in this water that depends on being looked at. It was whole before you arrived, and it will stay whole after you leave, and for now it has simply made a little room for you inside it, the way a held breath makes room, briefly, for one more small thing. Somewhere far above, on a night sky none of this water will ever see, Jupiter hangs enormous and unseen, the very gravity that needs this moon and keeps its ocean from ever freezing solid. You do not need to picture it. Down here its pull is not a shape or a light, only a faint, tidal patience running through the water itself. The same patience that has kept this whole hidden sea liquid for longer than anything on land has had a name. You simply drift inside the effect of it, cradled by a gravity you will never see the source of, the way you are sometimes held by things whose reasons you never fully learn. Feel the water at your fingertips, cool and faintly mineral, and feel how it thickens ever so slightly around you. Not enough to notice unless you go looking for it, just enough to remind you that this is not air you are floating through. It is something denser, something that wants to keep you rather than let you fall. Your lungs, if lungs mattered here, would find no reason to hurry. Each breath in this imagined water arrives on its own schedule, long and low, drawn out the way the ocean itself has drawn out every one of its days for longer than there have been days to count. Let your own breathing borrow that same unhurried rhythm now, in through the nose, slow and easy, and out again, even slower, the two of you. You and this ocean 30 kilometers deep, breathing on the same patient tide. There is a temptation, in a dark like this, to reach for a source, a direction, a place the darkness is coming from. Let that temptation go. This darkness does not come from anywhere. It simply is, the way silence in a house at 3 a.m. simply is, not empty of sound, but full of a particular, settled kind of quiet that only comes after everything loud has already finished happening. The ocean around you has already finished its loud things, if it ever had any. The crashing, the churning, whatever violence built this world in its first few careless years is done now, sunk into deep memory, and what is left is only this. Water holding still around a body it does not need to hurry. The current turns you once more, slower now, and you notice, without alarm, without any need to orient yourself, that you have been sinking this whole time, not fast, not falling, just settling. The way sediment settles at the bottom of a glass of water left overnight, patient and inevitable, and entirely without struggle. Far below, further than your eyes could ever really measure, even if there were light enough to measure by, something waits that is not ice at all. It is warm. It is rock. It is the first solid thing this ocean has ever been allowed to rest against, and you can feel, Even from this distance, a faint difference in the water itself, a warmth threading up from underneath the way warmth rises from a hearth in another room, felt before it is seen, sensed before it is understood. You do not need to hurry toward it. There is no version of this drift where arriving late means missing something. The floor has been down there for 4 billion years, and it is not going anywhere tonight. And neither, really, are you. Let the current keep turning you, unhurried, and let your body go heavier the way a body goes heavier just before real sleep arrives. That last easy surrender, where holding yourself together simply stops being necessary. There is nothing to plan for down here, nothing to solve, nothing waiting at the bottom of this drift that requires you to be awake for it in any ordinary sense. You can let your thoughts thin out the way the light thinned out far above you, one faint idea after another, dimming until only a kind of low, wordless attention is left, the mind's own version of drifting. Whatever is warm on that distant floor will still be warm when you arrive, however long the arriving takes, and however far your own eyes close before you get there. Nothing about this ocean has ever been in a rush to be understood, and it is not in a rush now, either. Not with you. Not with anything. The ocean is still holding its breath around you, patient in the glass-sealed dark. And for as long as you drift here, it is holding you inside that same breath, the two of you sinking together, by fractions of a degree, by fractions of a meter, toward whatever is waiting, warm and lingering and rooted, on the floor so far below. And here, at the bottom of that long drift, where the currents finally set you down, you find that the water does not go on forever. It has a floor. Far beneath the ceiling of ice, far beneath the leaf turn and the weightless dark you have been carried through, the ocean of Europa touches stone. Real rock, ancient and warm, the mantle of a small moon, pressed directly against seawater, with nothing between them. No seabed sediment built up over eons. No shoreline anywhere in any direction. Only the plain, patient meeting of mineral and water, held together in the black for longer than anything on the surface above has ever had to remember. It is worth resting on that meeting for a moment, because something quiet happens there. Something that asks nothing of the imagination beyond what chemistry already offers freely. When water meets certain kinds of rock, the iron and magnesium-rich stone thought to make up much of Europa's seafloor, it reacts with it, slowly, over spans of time too long for a single thought to hold. Scientists call this serpentinization, a word with more syllables than the process needs, since all it really describes is water working itself into mineral, changing the rock's structure, and in the doing, releasing hydrogen. No flame, no violence, no urgency, just the unhurried chemistry of stone giving something up to the water that has been leaning against it since before there were eyes anywhere to see it happen. That released hydrogen drifts upward into the ocean, the way warmth drifts up through a blanket, faint and diffuse, asking nothing in return. And where there is hydrogen, and warmth from below, and rock still settling from the deep tidal kneading you have already felt in this moon's history, there may also be vents. Not vents like a chimney exhaling smoke, nothing so hurried as that. Think instead of soft seams in the seafloor where heated, mineral-laden water rises into the colder ocean above, the way warm breath rises into cool night air, spreading, thinning, dissolving into everything around it. On Earth, we know these places. They sit at the bottom of our own dark seas, far past where sunlight has ever reached, and around them cluster entire communities of life that have never once needed daylight to survive. Tube worms taller than a person, pale crabs, clouded shrimp, and beneath them all, microbes that feed not on light but on the chemistry itself, on hydrogen, on sulfur, on the raw ingredients that rock and water make together in the dark. It is a whole way of being alive that owes nothing to the sun, an economy of energy built entirely from the patient friction of stone and sea. Think for a moment of what those earth vents actually hold, because it helps to picture the possibility properly. Around a single seam of warm water on our own ocean floor, whole neighborhoods gather, clams the size of dinner plates, eyeless shrimp finding their way by heat alone, bacteria forming pale mats thick enough to look like fresh fallen snow resting on black stone. None of it arrived there from sunlit water above. All of it grew up, generation after generation, entirely within that one warm plume, entirely dependent on the chemistry the rock itself provides. It is proof, already sitting on our own ocean floor, that a sunless world is not automatically a lifeless one. Distance from a star was never the deciding question. Warmth, water, and the right chemistry were enough, all along, in the dark beneath our own waves. If such seams exist on Europa's floor too, and the ingredients seem to be there, the warmth from tidal flexing, the mineral rock, the hydrogen freely given, then the same quiet possibility opens up, unhurried and unproven, resting lightly rather than insisting on itself. Perhaps somewhere in that lightless water, chemistry has folded itself into something we would call life. And if it has, let it be small, let it be slow, let it be patient, the way everything about this moon has already shown itself to be patient, not some looming presence with eyes adjusting to the dark, not some creature waiting to be found, but something closer to a whisper. A microbe, perhaps, drifting the way you yourself drifted a moment ago, carried on a current it does not choose. Living a life measured in years too slow for us to picture, dividing itself only once in a span of time that would swallow whole human decades without noticing. This is not the sea life of adventure stories. It is closer to lichen on a stone, closer to the moss that grows so slowly on the shaded side of a wall that a whole season passes before anyone notices it has moved at all. Nothing about this needs to be dramatic to be wondrous. There is no reason to picture teeth, or hunger, or anything reaching toward you out of that water. If anything at all drifts down there among the mineral seams, it has spent the whole of its existence in a warm, salted dark, untroubled by seasons, untouched by weather, asking nothing of the universe beyond the same slow trickle of chemistry it was born into. A life like that would not know it was remarkable. It would simply persist, the way stone persists, the way the tide persists, one unhurried division of one quiet cell at a time, generation folding gently into generation across spans of time too long for any single watch to keep. There is no need to reach for anything larger than that. No need to imagine eyes or fins or anything that swims with purpose toward a light. If Europa holds passengers within its held breath, they are probably nothing more than that. Single quiet cells. Chemistry organized just enough to call itself alive, existing the way stalactites exist, the way frost exists on a window, slowly, without hurry, without any awareness of being remarkable. And it may be that there is nothing there at all. Nobody watching this sky tonight knows for certain, and that uncertainty is allowed to simply sit here, unresolved, the way a question can rest in a dark room without needing to be answered before sleep comes. The ocean does not owe us proof. It has kept its own counsel for 4 billion years, and it will keep it a little longer, patient in the dark, holding its breath around whatever it may or may not carry. What matters more, perhaps, than whether anything lives down there, is what this floor tells us about the moon as a whole. That Europa is not simply an ice shell wrapped around a stagnant puddle of water, not a closed jar sealed away and biologically inert. It is a working system, complete from crust to core, ice above, ocean between, rock below, each layer touching the next, each one passing something to its neighbor the way the cracks and salts already showed us up near the surface. Warmth rises from the rock. Hydrogen rises from the warmth. The ocean carries both upward through its own slow circulation, the same unhurried turning that once cradled you as you sank. Nothing in this system is separate from anything else. It is one long, continuous exchange, seafloor to ice shell, moving at a pace so patient it makes the slowest tides on Earth look hurried by comparison. There is a kind of comfort, too, in how little any of this asks to be settled tonight. Whole careers are spent turning this question over, and still no one alive has seen that seafloor with their own eyes, has felt its warmth firsthand, has confirmed a single microbe drifting through Europa's night. And that is fine. It is more than fine. It is, in its own way, restful, because a question this large was never meant to be finished in one sitting, by one mind in one lifetime. It can simply be held, turned gently, set back down. The ocean has already shown us how to wait. 4 billion years of patience is not a hurried thing, and it does not ask that we hurry either. Let the possibility of life down there stay exactly as soft and unresolved as it is, a small warm thought tucked beside the larger one, that a world so far from any sun, wrapped in ice, sealed from every star, might still have found its own quiet way to keep something alive. And so we let that possibility rest exactly where it is. Not a mystery demanding to be cracked open tonight, not a countdown toward discovery, just a gentle thought to carry with you as the scene widens again. Whatever is or is not stirring in that hidden water, it is such a small thing, a single held breath inside a much larger held breath, inside an even larger darkness still. Because above this ocean, above this ice, above this whole small moon turning through its 3.5-day circuit, there is a planet so vast it makes Europa look like a single grain of sand circling a boulder. It is worth pulling back now, far back, past the ice, past the cracks, past this quiet seafloor, and whatever patient chemistry may be folded within it, out to where Europa itself becomes only one small point of light against the enormous, slow-turning presence of Jupiter. A scale so much larger than anything we have looked at so far tonight that it asks for nothing except that you let yourself. Feel how small, and how safely small, you and this whole tucked-away ocean both are. Leave the seafloor now, and those small, dreaming chemists of the dark, drifting through their long, unwatched lives among the rocks, and let yourself rise. Rise up through the black water, up past the place where warmth from below fades into the cold overhead, up toward the ceiling of ice you once thought of as a boundary, and now understand as skin. Keep rising, past the cracks stained rust and copper, out through the glass itself, out past the thin veil of oxygen too faint to be called air, until Europa is no longer the whole of your world, but a single pale marble hanging in the dark, and behind it, filling more and more of the view the further back you go, Jupiter waits. Let it fill the window of your mind completely. Jupiter is not simply large the way a mountain is large, or a country, or an ocean, on our own blue world. Jupiter is large the way a held breath before sleep can feel infinite, expanding to hold everything else inside it. 317 Earths could be folded into its mass, and there would still be room left in its bands of amber and cream, its slow marbled storms turning at the edge of hearing. Too vast to be loud. Only vast. If you tried to walk across the face of it, the way you might once have imagined walking across a field or a shoreline, you would still be walking when every clock you owned had long since stopped mattering. Distances like that are not really meant to be measured. They are meant to be felt. The way you feel the size of a room before you ever count its walls, and what this room asks of you, is only that you notice how little space your own concerns actually take up inside it. Europa, that whole ocean, that whole hidden world we have spent this long night leaning toward, circles this giant the way a single thought circles a much larger, much older mind, present, cared for, entirely unnecessary to the giant's own continuing. Jupiter does not notice Europa keeping its secrets. It simply turns, and Europa turns with it, 3.5 days at a time. Small and safe in the shadow of something too large to be troubled by anything so delicate as a moon. Around them both, other moons keep their own quiet company. Io glowing faintly with its own restless fire, Ganymede larger than the planet Mercury and utterly serene about it. Callisto drifting further out, its ancient face pocked with a patience of its own. None of them hurry. None of them are asked to. And under that shadow, in the dark beneath the ice, the ocean has been holding its breath for 4 billion years. Let that number rest in you for a moment, not as a fact to hold on to, but as a kind of ballast, something heavy and steady lowering itself into the floor of your chest. 4 billion years. Before there were memories to keep, before there was worry, or waiting, or any small unfinished task left folded on a desk somewhere, quietly accusing no one. Before continents on our own world had finished deciding their shapes, this ocean was already here, already patient, already tucked beneath its glass and warmed from within by hands of gravity too gentle to ever be called a grip. It has outlasted every question anyone has ever lain awake with. It will outlast this one too, and it does not mind. It was never in a hurry to be understood. There is something in that vastness that asks nothing of you, and that, tonight, is the gift of it. We so rarely let ourselves be small. Most days ask us to be large, to be capable, to be responsible, to be the one who remembers, who finishes, who carries the weight of every unclosed loop from morning until the moment the light goes out. But here, held for a moment against 317 Earths and 4 billion years of a quiet, waiting sea, none of that weight has anywhere to attach itself. You are not required to be equal to Jupiter. No one ever has been. You are not required to have finished anything today, or to remember it in the morning, or to have been anything other than a small, warm, breathing shape tucked somewhere on a much smaller, much more recent world, borrowed for a while and returned gently to the dark at the end of each day, the way every day is returned. To be small, out here, is not a diminishment. It is closer to being held. Think of how the ocean under the ice is held, pressed between a warm floor it did not choose and a cold ceiling it did not choose, moved by tides it does not control, kept liquid by a warmth it never had to earn, only received over and over for longer than any memory could carry forward on its own. It never had to hold itself together. Jupiter's hands, distant and enormous, and entirely indifferent in the kindest sense of that word, have been doing that work all along, without praise, without needing to be thanked. without even noticing that the job was being done. You, too, are held by things larger than you're noticing tonight. Gravity keeping you settled into whatever is beneath you now. The slow chemistry of your own blood attending to itself without your instruction. Hours moving forward on their own, whether or not you watch them. You do not have to be the one holding everything up. Something larger already is. You are permitted, for these few minutes and for the rest of the night that follows them, to set the weight down and let the vastness carry it instead. The way a small moon lets a much larger giant carry the whole shape of its orbit without once being asked. Notice, too, how little the ocean asks of itself. It is not trying to become anything other than what it already is. It is not rehearsing tomorrow, or replaying yesterday, or measuring its own progress against some far horizon. It simply continues, warmed and turned and carried, one immeasurably long moment folded into the next, and that continuing has been enough for 4 billion years. There is no version of this ocean that has ever needed to prove itself worthy of Jupiter's attention in order to keep receiving it. The warmth arrives regardless. The tide arrives regardless. Perhaps, tonight, the same could be allowed to be true of you, that whatever holds you does not require a performance first. That rest does not have to be earned before it is given. That you are permitted simply to continue, unremarkable and cared for, the way a small moon is permitted to keep circling without once justifying its orbit. Rest, for a moment, in that arrangement. There is no task waiting on the other side of this thought. There is only the giant turning slowly in the dark with its rings of unseen dust and its storms too old to have names, and the small moon held in its keeping, and the ocean inside the moon held in turn. Breath after unhurried breath, needing nothing else from the universe tonight except to continue exactly as it already is. If an entire sea, larger than every ocean on Earth combined, can be patient for 4 billion years without straining toward tomorrow, then whatever is still unfinished in your own small life tonight can certainly wait a few hours more. It has already waited this long. It can wait through one more sleep. And into that stillness, almost without meaning to, a small, warm question arrives, not urgent, not the kind of question that pulls you upright, but the kind that drifts in sideways, the way a thought does at the very edge of sleep. How did creatures as small as us, standing on a world so much smaller than the giant we have just been resting against, ever come to know any of this at all? How did anyone, anywhere, ever reach across all that distance and cold and dark and come back with the knowledge that an ocean was breathing quietly under a shell of ice, hundreds of millions of miles from the nearest window it might be watched through? We are smaller than Europa. Europa is smaller than Jupiter. And yet somehow, across all that difference in scale, a kind of listening reached out and found this hidden sea anyway, patient enough and careful enough to notice a whisper crossing so much silence. Perhaps it began the way all careful noticing begins, not with an answer, but with a small mark left venting into the emptiness above the ice, a faint exhale escaping upward from the moon's far southern edge, the ocean letting a little of itself go out into the dark simply because the pressure of being alive for 4 billion years occasionally has to find somewhere to go. Perhaps that faint sigh, rising unhurried into space, was the first thread pulling us closer. The first invitation the ocean ever sent outward without knowing anyone was there to receive it. And perhaps what matters most right now is not the answer itself, but the fact that somewhere, something vast enough to hold 317 Earths still has room in it for something as small as a question, rising quietly upward, unbothered, in no hurry at all to be caught. And that question can rest now, unanswered. The way all good questions are allowed to rest before sleep, because there is another kind of answer waiting for us, one that does not come from wondering how small creatures learned so much, but from watching what the ocean itself chooses to let go. Because held breath, even patient held breath, even breath held for 4 billion years, wants eventually to be let out. And in the thin hush above Europa's south pole, telescopes turned toward that bright shell have caught it happening. Not an eruption, not anything violent, just an exhale, faint as a whisper fogging a cold window, rising for a while and then settling back into stillness. Picture it slowly, because it deserves to be pictured slowly. Far above the moon, a space telescope orbiting Earth trains its wide, patient eye across hundreds of millions of miles of dark, and in certain ultraviolet light, it notices something strange hanging near Europa's southern edge. An extra brightness, a faint curtain of atoms that should not be there. Atoms of hydrogen and oxygen, the very pieces that water breaks into when it drifts far from any surface to hold it together. This is in 2012, and it appears again, fainter, in 2016. Both times it is subtle. Both times it could almost be mistaken for nothing at all, a flicker, a trick of instrument and shadow. But both times the signature points to the same gentle conclusion. Something below is venting. Something is breathing out through the glass. Let yourself imagine it the way it may actually look, if such a thing could ever be seen up close, without the burden of proving it. 100 miles, perhaps 200, above the icy South Pole, and a plume rises. Not fire, not smoke. Nothing like the eruptions you might picture from a restless volcano, but water. Only water. Escaping upward in slow motion into the almost nothing of space, spreading, thinning, and falling back as fine frost, or drifting away entirely into the emptiness around Jupiter. It would take hours to climb that high, and hours more to fall, if it falls at all. It is less an explosion than an unhurried sigh, the kind you might let out at the end of a very long day, when no one is watching and there's no reason to hold it in any longer. There is no sound to it, out there in the vacuum. No hiss, no rush of air, only a slow bloom of pale mist unfurling against black, lit faintly by sunlight that has traveled 5 times farther than it travels to reach your own window. And then, just as unhurried as it's rising, folding back down into the dark from which it came. No one has watched such a plume rise in this way, not with human eyes, not yet. And perhaps that is part of why it feels so easy to imagine gently. It exists for now mostly as a hint, a suggestion caught at the very edge of what instruments could detect, and hints are easier to hold softly than certainties ever are. Even the scientists studying those 2 faint brightenings, years apart, describe them the way you might describe a shape half seen in fog, present, probably, likely real, but shy, and not eager to repeat itself on command. Other attempts to catch the plumes again, in other years, found nothing at all, which is not disappointment so much as confirmation that whatever is happening down there follows its own private rhythm, venting when it vents, and resting when it rests, answerable to no one's schedule but its own. And think of what it might mean for that sigh to carry a little of everything below. If Europa's ocean truly touches warm rock at its floor, truly carries salts and minerals up through its slow currents, then whatever rises through a crack and out into space might be carrying, in trace and whisper form, some small sample of the deep. Not proof of anything alive. Nothing here insists on that. Nothing needs to. Only the possibility that the ocean's exhale is not empty breath, but scented breath. Breath that has passed near a kitchen. Breath that remembers where it has been. That possibility alone is enough to change how humanity has decided to approach this moon. Not by breaking in, not by drilling down through kilometers of ice with force and haste, but by simply waiting nearby with open hands, ready to receive whatever the moon offers on its own unhurried schedule. Because that is the quiet decision at the heart of the years just past and the years just ahead. That if an ocean is generous enough to breathe outward on its own, then the kindest, most patient thing to do is meet that breath partway, high above the ice, and let it fall gently into open instruments rather than forcing a door that was never meant to be forced. And so, in the autumn of 2024, a spacecraft the size of a small house, its solar wings stretched wider than a basketball court to drink in what little sunlight reaches so far from home, lifted away from Earth and began the long, looping, patient journey outward. Its name carries the moon's own name inside it, a small act of naming that feels almost tender, Europa Clipper, built not to land, not to drill, not to disturb, but to circle, to watch, to taste. The journey itself asks for a kind of patience that mirrors the ocean's own. Years of drifting through the dark solar system, borrowing gravity from other worlds along the way, swinging past Mars and back past Earth to gather speed the way a skater gathers momentum from a long, slow glide before the real motion begins. There is no rushing this. The distances are what they are, and the spacecraft simply accepts them, coasting through the cold and the quiet the way anything must when the miles number in the hundreds of millions. And somewhere near the end of this decade, likely in 2030, it will finally arrive, slipping into orbit not around Europa itself, but around Jupiter, so that its own path can weave close by the icy moon again and again, dozens of times, in careful, repeating passes, rather than committing to a single risky orbit around Europa alone, where Jupiter's fierce radiation presses hardest. On each of those close passes, low and swift above the cracked white shell, the spacecraft will carry instruments built for exactly this kind of gentle receiving. A mass spectrometer to sample whatever thin haze of gas and ice grains drifts within reach. Cameras to study the lineae and the chaos terrain in painstaking detail. An ice-penetrating radar to feel, in its own way, for the shape of what lies beneath the surface. And a magnetometer descended from the very instrument that first felt the ocean's presence decades ago, ready to confirm and refine what that older, fainter signal first suggested. If the plumes rise again while the spacecraft happens to be passing near, it may fly directly through one, letting those faint traces of water settle onto sensors built to notice such small, quiet things. No drilling required. No forcing the glass, just presence and readiness and the willingness to be exactly where the ocean happens to be exhaling. And Europa Clipper does not travel this road alone. Already ahead of it, launched in 2023 by the European Space Agency, another spacecraft called JUICE, a gentler word than its instruments deserve, though perhaps not gentler than its intent, is making its own long, looping way toward Jupiter's largest moons, arriving in the same general span of years, its attention divided among several icy worlds, but returning again and again to Europa's neighborhood, adding its own careful measurements to the growing, unhurried picture. 2 missions, built by different hands on different continents, both converging on the same soft idea that this moon does not need to be conquered to be known. It only needs to be visited, quietly, respectfully, the way you might visit someone sleeping, careful not to wake what does not need waking, content simply to sit nearby and notice the slow rise and fall of breath. There is something worth resting in, here, before we let this movement close. All of this, the telescopes catching faint ultraviolet whispers from countless millions of miles away, the years of patient interplanetary travel, the careful instruments waiting to taste a passing mist, none of it requires touching the ice at all. The ocean beneath Europa's glass has, in its own way, made itself just barely reachable, offering these thin traces of itself upward into the dark for anyone patient enough to be there when they rise. Humanity's part in this has not been force, it has been attention. It has been the very long, very quiet act of noticing and waiting and returning to look again. And that noticing did not begin with spacecraft, or with space telescopes, or even with the idea of oceans hidden under ice. It began much earlier, much more simply, with a single curious eye pressed to a small tube of glass and metal on a cold night centuries ago, watching 4 faint points of light shift their quiet positions around Jupiter from one evening to the next. Patient enough to write down what was seen. Patient enough to look again the following night. And the night after that, letting a single careful habit of attention become, 400 years later, a spacecraft crossing the dark to meet an ocean's breath. And before the spacecraft, before the plumes, before anyone could imagine an ocean keeping its long breath under a shell of glass, there was only a man on a winter rooftop in Padua, pointing a homemade tube of lenses at the sky and refusing to look away. You can let yourself drift there now, back past the launches and the orbiters, back past every instrument that has ever touched this moon, to the very first night someone noticed it was there at all. It is January of 1610, and Galileo Galilei has his crude little telescope propped against the cold air, watching Jupiter the way you might watch a single candle across a dark room, steady, patient, waiting to see if anything moves. Beside the planet, he finds 3 faint points of light in a neat line, and he assumes at first they are simply stars, uninteresting, background, but he keeps looking, night after unhurried night, and the stars will not behave. They slide, they swap places. A 4th one appears. Within a week he understands what almost no one before him had dared to say out loud. These small lights are not fixed to the heavens at all. They are little worlds turning around Jupiter the way our own world turns around the sun. One of those 4 faint dots is Europa, though it will be centuries before anyone learns what it is hiding. For now it is only a pinprick of light, tracked by hand, recorded in ink, a single patient observer bearing witness to something vast, without needing to touch it. That is how this whole story begins, not with proof, but with attention. A person looks up, notices a small thing behaving strangely, and writes it down before going to sleep, trusting that the sky will be there again in the morning, and that someone, someday, will look again. And for more than 3.5 centuries, that is almost all Europa remains. 4 small points of light, later resolved into 4 small disks, numbers refined, orbits calculated, a moon known mostly as an idea, a dot in a column of astronomical tables. Telescopes grow larger, lenses grow clearer. Generation after generation of careful people spend their nights doing the same unhurried thing Galileo did, and the picture sharpens by degrees, the way a face slowly resolves out of fog, or the way a room emerges from darkness once your eyes have had long enough to adjust. Each new observer inherits the last one's notebook, adds a single line, and passes it on. No one rushes. No one needs to. The orbit will be there again next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, patient in exactly the way its ocean will one day turn out to be. But no one has yet come close enough to see the ice, let alone wonder what might be breathing beneath it. The moon simply waits, the way it always has, turning in its long silent circuit, keeping whatever it holds to itself, a sealed letter passed from one century to the next, without ever being opened. Then, in 1979, something finally arrives close enough to see the glass for what it is. A small spacecraft named Voyager, launched 2 years earlier and flung outward on a long, unhurried arc through the solar system, sweeps past Jupiter and its 4 Galilean moons, and for the first time a camera built by human hands looks directly at Europa's skin. What comes back is startling in its plainness, a surface almost perfectly smooth, brighter than any other moon or planet nearby, laced with a faint tracery of long reddish lines crossing and recrossing like veins beneath pale skin. Almost no craters mark it, which puzzles the scientists studying the pictures back on Earth. A surface this smooth, this young-looking, this strangely healed, should be impossible on a lifeless ball of rock and ice billions of years old. Something, they begin to suspect, keeps erasing the wounds. Something underneath is still at work. It is the first time humanity sees the shell itself, the glass over the held breath, though no one yet knows to call it that. They only know that Europa does not look the way a dead world should look, and that a question has quietly opened that will take another 20 years, and a different kind of spacecraft to begin answering. That spacecraft is named Galileo, sent out across the decades that follow to carry its namesake's patience a little further, arriving in orbit around Jupiter in 1995 and staying for 8 long, careful years, circling close to Europa again and again, each pass gathering a little more. And it is here, sometime in the late 1990s, that the moon finally lets something slip. Tucked onboard is a small, unglamorous instrument called a magnetometer, built simply to feel the shape of magnetic fields as the spacecraft glides past. As Galileo sweeps near Europa, the readings come back strange. Not the magnetic field you would expect from a plain frozen rock, but a field that bends and answers Jupiter's own enormous magnetic breathing, as if something inside Europa were echoing it back. That kind of echo, scientists slowly realize, can only come from a layer of something salty and liquid and vast, moving in response, conducting the signal the way a nerve conducts a signal through the body. It is not a photograph. No one sees the ocean directly. There is no window, no beam of light returning an image, nothing you could point to and call a picture of water. There is only a faint deviation in a line on a graph, a needle nudged a little further than it should have been nudged, and a small team of scientists on the other side of the solar system leaning closer to their screens, checking the numbers again and again before they will let themselves believe it. But an unhurried, careful reading of a needle's faint trembling is enough to tell an entire world's secret, that under the glass, something enormous and liquid has been waiting all along, holding still, holding its breath, keeping its own low hum of a heartbeat hidden from every eye but this one faint instrument's. Think, for a moment, about how strange and how tender that whole chain of attention is. A person with a homemade telescope, noticing 4 small lights out of thousands. A spacecraft, decades later, simply looking harder at one of those lights and finding cracks instead of craters. Another spacecraft, decades further on, not even looking with a camera at all, but listening, in its own quiet magnetic way, for a whisper from 60 kilometers under the ice. None of it happened quickly. None of it happened by force. Each generation simply added its small, careful observation to the ones before it, the way you might set one more soft stone on a cairn before turning to leave, trusting the path will remain marked when the next traveler comes along. 400 years of that. 400 years of humans doing, in their own patient way, almost exactly what the ocean itself has been doing all along, waiting, without any hurry, for the right conditions to reveal what they are. There is something almost lulling in that thought, if you let it settle. All that striving we imagine science to be, all that reaching and racing, and at its heart it is mostly this: someone stays up a little later than everyone else, looks a little more carefully at something ordinary, writes down what they saw, and then goes to sleep, leaving the rest for whoever comes next. Galileo did not need to explain the ocean. He only needed to notice the dot. Voyager did not need to find the water. It only needed to photograph the cracks and let the strangeness sit there, unresolved, for other hands to pick up later. The magnetometer did not need to prove there was life below. It only needed to feel one honest tremor in a field and trust that meaning would follow, eventually, in its own unhurried time. Each of them did their one small part and then, in a sense, rested. The way the ice above that ocean rests. The way the ocean itself rests, unbothered by how long an answer takes to arrive. You can feel your own attention starting to loosen now the same way. The story settling rather than sharpening. Details drifting a little further apart, the way things do in the last soft minutes before sleep. Somewhere far above you, if you wanted to imagine it one more time, that same moon is turning in its long, slow circuit around a giant planet, its cracked white shell catching a faint borrowed light, and somewhere beneath that shell the ocean is exactly where it has always been, unseen, unhurried, holding what it holds. It does not need you to finish the thought. It has been patient for 4 billion years, and it can certainly be patient through however many more nights it takes for someone, somewhere, to look a little closer. The way you are looking a little closer now, right up until your eyes finally, easily, close. Tonight has been about a moon wrapped in glass, bright and cracked and far above us, catching a distant sun on ice we never had to touch. Tonight has been about a hidden ocean, older than our own, kept liquid in the dark by a warmth that never needed daylight to exist. Tonight has been about what may be waiting on a seafloor none of us will ever see, and about how good it can feel to not know something completely, to let a question stay open the way a door stays open onto a dark, harmless room. And tonight has been about the long, patient watching that brought us even this much. The plumes, the probes, the centuries of looking up and wondering, carried gently all the way to this quiet room where you are now. None of this needs anything from you tonight. Not one fact has to be kept. Not one name, not one number, not one detail about ice shells or seafloors or spacecraft needs to stay with you past this sentence. You were never being tested, and you are not being tested now. The ocean under that ice has been sealed away for longer than there have been eyes on Earth to imagine it, and it will still be there, patient and unwitnessed, whether or not you remember a single word of how we described it. Your only task tonight was to lie still and let a voice move slowly around you, and you have already done that perfectly, simply by staying. If your eyes are still open even a little, you don't have to close them on purpose. Just let them rest where they are. Let your breathing be however it already is, a little slower now than when we began, unhurried, low, almost forgetting itself. Let your legs go heavy, first one and then the other, sinking into the bed the way a moon's old ice slowly settles under its own weight. Faint creak by faint creak, over centuries. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is nothing else you need to understand. The dark around you is not the dark of that far moon, cold and airless. It is a softer dark, a held dark, the kind that only wants you to rest inside it. Another quiet exploration is already waiting on the screen, ready when this one finishes. And you don't have to do anything at all, just let it begin on its own, low and familiar, while you drift further than you already have. There is no reason to reach for anything, no reason to check the time, no reason to decide what happens next. It has already been decided for you, gently, the way the tide is already decided long before it arrives. And if some small part of your mind is still awake enough to wonder, here is one last thought to loosen into, not to answer, only to hold loosely the way you might hold a warm stone in an open palm, somewhere under all that ice. In a dark no sunlight has ever reached, water has been moving, slowly, patiently, for longer than there have been humans to wonder about it at all. What does it feel like? Do you think to be a place that has never once needed to be found in order to be real? You don't have to answer that. You don't have to think about it any further than this. Just let it sit there, distant and harmless, like a light left on in a house very far away. Your body is heavy now, and warm, and there is nothing left to carry. Whatever thoughts are still drifting through can drift on without you, out past the edge of hearing, out past the edge of this room, out toward a quiet moon that is, right now, still patiently keeping its own ocean warm in the dark, asking nothing of you at all. Sleep well.